To evaluate or not. This case study is based off of Lolo, a 4th grade student at Ridgemont Elementary. He is originally from the Pacific Islands, but has lived in multiple places with different dialects. He's a 4th grade student, but has the performance level of a kindergartner. Prior to moving to the United States in 2nd grade, Lolo has never had a formal education. Lolo's teacher, Mr. Hamlin, believes that Lolo is emotionally disturbed and needs to have special education evaluation performed on him. His reasoning is, besides his below grade level performance, he tends to pick on other students in the class and try to intimidate them. However, the school psychologist is hesitant to perform an evaluation given Lolo's interesting background and limited exposure to a school environment. All other factors would have to be ruled out before the school psychologist would feel comfortable administering a special education evaluation. The first question in our case study asks, how can the team at Lolo's school site ensure that due process issues are addressed in his case and that a special education referral is necessary? What factors should be considered? Addressing the first part of the question, due process is essential. There are 3 main parts that I've underlined, as you can see from the chart that I made. The first one is pre-referral, which is basically observation of the student, then reaching out to the parents. From this point, if the parents feel comfortable, the teacher, school psychologist, parents, and translator, if needed, can begin to discuss, which moves into the second part of the chart, which is factors to consider. So here we're basically trying to get a better understanding of Lolo's background, which includes his home life, the places he's lived before, and just getting more personal insight. It's helpful to have the parents share their questions and concerns as well. Then the issue should be addressed of Lolo's struggle in school and his questionable behavior. At this point, if there are no particular factors that stand out to the school psychologist as being determiners for Lolo's low academic performance and aggressive behavior, if the parents feel comfortable with it, then the third part could take place, which is the evaluation. Also, it's important to note that Mr. Hamlin should not be a factor in determining if Lolo needs special education, because as you can see that I included some quotes here. Often this inappropriate diagnosis of children of different cultures, races, and ethnicities may result in a confusing disability with diversity. So Mr. Hamlin should not be the one running the observation, which is why the school psychologist is doing this. So the second question asks, what academics and behavioral sports should be put into place to help Lolo immediately if he is found eligible for special education? What if he isn't found to be eligible? So I made a little chart here, as you can see, for the special education route. So if the functional behavior assessment was completed by the school psychologist and it was revealed that Lolo does indeed need does need special education, then the next part would happen, which is starting to create the behavioral intervention plan, or the BPI, which is basically an IEP, but it's more specifically designed for behavioral intervention. At this point, after the school psychologist creates a draft of this, all the IEP members will be present for a meeting, just like the school psychologist, parents, administrators, general education teacher. They will basically come to agreement for measurable goals, preventive strategies, consequences, and then they will sign it into agreement. And there will be an annual review of the measurable goals every 12 months, which I'll just talk about in just a second. Okay, so measurable goals are, according to my quote here by Mitchell Yell, measurable annual goals describe what the student is reasonably expected to accomplish in a 12-month period when provided the appropriate special education services. So an example for Lolo would be strengthening Lolo's English language and increasing his academic level. So he'll have many of those outlined within his IEP or BPI, and they'll be updated every 12 months. The next thing included in the BPI will be replacement behaviors. So we have antecedents, behaviors, and consequence. So antecedent is a task or situation that can be triggering to the student, and then we identify the behaviors, which are the negative actions of the students that occur after the antecedent, and the consequence, which is how the teacher will punish Lolo in a way that will be effective for him, so hopefully the behavior won't occur again. Moving on, we have academic measurable goals, which will also be included in the BPI. So this is based off of standards that we're going to use as benchmarks to monitor Lolo's progress and modify if needed. So here I wrote a little example out. I said, Lolo will effectively apply a variety of reading strategies for comprehending, interpreting, and evaluating text at the 1st grade level as measured by informal assessment. So we'll have many of those outlined within his IEP. And then moving along, we have possible eligibility for services. So the first one is wraparound services, which is a really unique opportunity for not only Lolo, but his family. So there are many different forms of this service. One of them is that he can have a behavioral specialist consultant come into his home and work with him and his needs, and just helping with him with his mental health or any other additional assistance he might need. and this also includes counseling and therapy. This is just a really nice support to have for the family and for Lolo, and these will be outlined in the IEP as well. Another possible eligibility service for Lolo would be having working with intervention specialists inside and outside of the classroom. So if he needed it, he could work one-on-one with an intervention specialist because he is pretty far behind, and the intervention specialist would work with him through his problems and try to meet his measurable goals so he can be a more effective learner. So let's talk about what would happen if he was not eligible for special education. So at this point, the behavioral or the functional behavior assessment comes back as negative, that he does not need special education. There are still methods and techniques that Mr. Hamlet could implement into his classroom to help Lolo out. The first one I have down is RTII. So as we discussed in class, I think it'd be effective to have Lolo in either Tier 2 or Tier 3 to give him more individualized attention, and also so he's kind of not around other people because he clearly has issues being around other classmates. This way he's more secluded from everyone else, which I think is helpful for him. So as Susan Kruger said, these groups are formed for skill mastery, and they are just temporary until they meet the goals set in place. So if Lolo proves to do really well and doesn't need RTI anymore, he can just be part of the Tier 1 again, if that ever were to happen. Another suggestion I would make is ESL, which is English as a second language. This would help him to improve his dialect and so he could better understand the material. Moving along, Mr. Hamlet could also have consequences for Lolo's inappropriate behavior. So I've outlined 4 basic ones here, which is positive reinforcement, positive punishment, negative reinforcement, and negative punishment. So positive reinforcement is something added to increase the likelihood of a behavior. Positive punishment is something added to decrease the likelihood of a behavior. As for negative reinforcement, that something is removed to increase the likelihood of a behavior, and negative punishment, something is removed to decrease the likelihood of a behavior. I hope that wasn't too confusing. So in my last slide concluding, I have future actions. So I would say that stronger communication with the parents is absolutely essential just for Lolo's improvement within his academics and his behavior. If given the referral, screening for disability is another action step, I would say. And then implementation of special education services, I have a question mark because obviously we don't know what the result would be. But if there was a functional behavior assessment and it came back positive, then a behavioral implementation plan, which is the BPI, and if it came back negative, then we could still, like I mentioned earlier, include RTII or ESL just to help Lolo. With these in mind and these future action steps, Lolo hopefully would move to a point where he would be confident in his academics and move forward to being a better student overall. And then finally, I have my bibliography. I hope you guys enjoyed.